now we've created kind of a cool shape. So we're working in these. Into the different views, you can also import image planes. And let me just talk, some of these are pretty important to know. You can just affect different things. I mean, it has a lot of, under shading, these are kind of your 4, 5, 6 keys. Yeah, X-ray is kind of useful. It's somewhat see-through, often if you want to see an image plane. So it's kind of like wireframe, but you can sort of still see the general outline and shape. I use that for modeling humans. Anyways, and this will just select, this is like turning your lighting on. And if you just want to be working on one object, I'm editing this vertex and moving these around, and well, let's say I'm working here and this is kind of getting in the way, and yeah, I end up sometimes, oh, I didn't want to select that, or it ends up selecting the vertices of that. This button is really handy. Isolate selected. Now only that's there, and the others are hidden until I unclick it. Now you want to do that in object mode, so it selects the entire object, because if you do that in edit mode, you have your vertexes selected, and you go to isolate selected, and it'll only do kind of what you selected, which is not what you want. You want to undo that, and then go to isolate selected, and you can just work with that one object. Also, if you're in your option box, the ones to the very far right, you can also create layers, and adding display layers, you can set what's hidden or what's shown. So if you do command, oops, sorry, that's hide the entire program, it's still open. On mine that's command H, I'm using a Mac, probably control H. Anyways, you can select ways to, if you create a new layer and then you right click and you add selected objects, yeah, let's see, add selected objects. Now you have this layer and both those objects are on that layer, and then if we add a new layer and take this object and add that, now when we click on these layers, we should be able to, yeah, we can turn the transparency or just turn off the visibility and just use that as a way of organizing. So it's all about keeping your objects organized, because you know, right now we only have 3 objects, you know, no big deal. Whereas I've had projects with thousands of objects. So when you're, an important thing is the display or window, sorry, and the outliner. And this shows you all your things in your scene. So we can see we just have our camera we created that we're looking through, and default light set, since we're just using the default lighting, and then your other cameras, you don't want to mess with these, and you can select these objects. Now let's say I'm going to scale this down, let's say I want these to be kind of a part of this here. And here's a great way, if you go over something and hit space, that'll frame that up, and then you can move it around. And here you can move it around more freely because it's only moving it on these 2 axes, it's not moving it up. So let's say I want these to be a part of this. I can move these down and over. Now you can see they're lined up. I might even move them kind of inside it. And anyways, and depending what I'm looking for, there's ways you can make all three of these able to affect them at once. And you're going to use group and Control G or Mac Command G groups these three together. Now they're one group. So we can see all three objects. So now when we click on that, it should select all three, right? Well, it only selected the one, and it didn't select the entire group. Well, you want to hit the up arrow key, and that'll select your entire group. And if there's groups within groups, you can select up again, and it'll kind of sets it up higher in hierarchy. And if you select down, it'll just go down to the first object in your group. So that's often how I work. You know, you can use that to kind of set up how things are organized, and you know, I could cool object. Now when I'm working, you know, because I've literally had thousands of objects in projects before. And one thing you can use, let's say you're building, let's say this is a person. Let me make cubes just because that's easier. Let's say this is a person. Let me scale it down. This is R. Just created the default cube. And I'm going to do Shift D, that duplicates it. And if I wanted more, you can see I moved it over this distance. If I do Shift D again, it'll just delete them in a line. So, for example, if I'm creating a fence, let me scale it way up and way in. So you've got a fence post. You can do Shift D, move it over in this direction, and then quickly you have a fence, and you can see we already have all these objects, so we'd want to group them. Now they're all one object, and we can move them all around like that. Anyways, so maybe you don't want to group. Maybe you want them to be exactly one object in here, not part of this, still separated by three, but one object. And let me have a warning. Once they're part of the same object, you can't really. It is very difficult to make them separate objects again, and even when you're adding materials, if you know you want them to be different materials, I often recommend grouping. But if it's a character's arm, you're going to want that character, you know, to be part of the same object. So you're going to make sure you're in your polygons menu. Move over the outliner. And then I can shift and select this as well. If I go to mesh, I can combine these. Now these are one object. Not objects grouped together, but one object. And oh yeah, let me also mention groups. You can switch them around really quickly, so if you just want the one in a group, there's really no big consequences for switching that around, just for moving things around. So now this is one object. I can shift click it again and go to mesh combine again. Now this entire thing is one object. The groups are still there, but they're really not serving anything since it's back to whoops, or usually you do one or the other, so I guess these are linking back to the group information. But anyways, one object. And so let's say I want, so now this shows you want to be really set before combining, because let's say I wanted to combine these two. Well, I want to move this. Well, I can't move just this. The only way I can do that, well, I can select all the vertices and move these over, and luckily there's not that many, so it's not that complicated. And you can also, you know, apply all the same things, scaling, rotation. But if this was complex, it might be difficult or even impossible to select all these vertices. So since they're part of the same object, and let me